Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. The best 1 hour of television on right now is not, in my humble opinion, Game of Thrones, but is instead Billions, the story of a ruthless hedge fund honcho and a ruthless attorney general going head-to-head has made awful people sympathetic, hilarious, and fun to watch by embracing noir, crime fiction, and the very personal and at times very esoteric interests of its creators. Our next guests, Brian Koppelman and David Levien, have created a classic yet daringly original 1 hour of drama. Take a look.
Here we are, friends of a sort. I need your assistance on this one.
You want me to help put you in the state attorney general's office?
I do.
There's something that I need in return.
Name it.
Taylor Mason. I want them in a fucking cell.
This is a new day for Axe Cap.
Money just walked in. You gotta pick sides.
Get with it or get fucked.
There are things they were comfortable with at Axe Camp that we will never do here.
I solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution.
I know what you're doing, and I'm here to tell you don't.
I am running. And when I win, I'm gonna roll over you like it's Tiananmen Square.
Yes!
Even when one keeps things mathematical, a satisfying solution isn't always available.
Be sure you don't forget about me.
Take them out.
This I do.
I'm overmatched. For the first time since I can remember.
Walk away.
All I want is vengeance, and it will be had.
This is where you do some version of the happy dance.
It's not okay!
Have fun storming the castle.
Thank you.
Everybody, please welcome the incredibly talented creators of Billions, Brian Koppelman and David Levien. Guys, thank you so much for being here. This is at my request. It's a rare thing that I do where I reach out personally to people and say, I love your shit. Please come on and talk to me about it.
That's great. Thanks for having us, and you can only be disappointed from me.
You know, you guys have been writing together for what, 20 years now, at the very least?
Yes.
Right, 2025? How did that start? And how did you realize that it was perfect right away?
I mean, 50 years ago when the two of us started. No, we grew up together. So we've been like brothers since we were 14 and 15. And after a lot of conversation about this, and when we first met, the way that we related to each other was by sharing movies, books, music, comedy routines. Like, we just fell into this groove of talking about the world of that kind of culture. And both of us got to a place where we were really ready to try to do this. And I walked into a poker club one night and called David, and he had been writing and working on doing this, and I said, I think I know the sort of world we should set this movie in. And he said, you know, what kind of characters are in the world? I said, well, come with me tomorrow night. And he came with me to the poker club, and from that moment on, we were partners at this. And we wrote that script, and that became the movie Rounders, and that started our career off. And we've been working steadily together since then.
Has that process changed at all, going into doing a 1 hour drama on television?
The only way it's changed is
More work?
when we were, there's a lot more work because we're doing, you know, these 12 episodes. But in the beginning, when we started, we were working in this tiny little office. We had one laptop, and we would both, you know, I would do the typing because I was a faster typist. He would pace around. We would sort of talk the whole thing out, and we wrote sort of every word of it together. Now we outline it together, and then when we're going to write an episode from the beginning, we split up the scenes. And, you know, often we'll be working in the same office. Sometimes it'll be on the weekends, at home, whatever. We'll be in separate places, but now we do divide up the scene writing.
What was it like when you had to bring other writers into the mix with you there?
Well, we've collaborated before with other writers, and like in anything else, you have to be really careful who you choose to work with. So we've been really lucky on Billions to surround ourselves, lucky and thoughtful and careful about it, to surround ourselves with really good people, super talented writers. Like when we wrote Ocean's 13, Steven Soderbergh directed it, and even though he wasn't a writer on it, we really collaborated closely with Steven. We would send him pages and acts, and he would give us back notes. And that was probably the first time that we really collaborated with a third person, and we loved it. When it's the right person and when they're there for the same reasons we are, which is, how do you make this great? Like, it doesn't matter if you came up with the killer line, or he did, or I did. If there is if we could find one killer line between the three of us, we've won.
Best idea wins.
Best idea wins, and being aware of that in all areas of life actually makes life much less friction heavy and much easier, you know?
Unless someone's not coming up with good ideas. You're like pulling everything out of them. Then there's friction.
Well, then we stomp them like Billy Bats and Goodfellas, you know what I mean? Yeah.
You know what, as long as someone's trying. That's,
Even in the writer's room?
You know what, if everybody's like doing their best, something good comes out of it.
That's true, yeah. As long as some papers are coming in or ideas are coming in, people can bounce off of that and improvise.
If you start to feel like somebody's given up, or they're phoning it in, or maybe working on their own thing instead of thinking about our show, then it can get a little painful. But, you know, if people are trying, something good's going to come out of it. Some of the best ideas have come out of somebody giving an idea that's not quite there. And, you know, whether it's one of ours or one of the writers' rooms, us saying no, but it spurs some other better idea that lands in the show.
It's an amazing process. And, you know, it's really hard being not an our job, but being a writer in a writer's room on a show you didn't originate. It's a hard job because you're trying to guess what the guys who did are thinking and feeling about the characters. So even though when we're in the middle of the season, sometimes I have to remind myself of what a hard task we've given these people. You know, because the show, the voice of the show is so clearly the voice that the two of us have been developing for these 20 years. So we really love the people who collaborate with us and who try. Even though, like I say, in the middle of the season, if you ask me, I might be grousing a little more. Now that we've written the season, it all starts to feel easy and fun.
Well, those contributors in the writer's room, they have to be even more willing than you guys probably to kind of kill their darlings. Like, they're going in with pages of darlings.
Well, we'll kill them. It's fine.
Exactly. And maybe they'll use them on the side project when they start phoning it in.
Maybe that's why they start phoning it in. You just killed all their darlings.
I'll just take these back.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the first season and actually creating the show Billions. Was there a part of you guys that was worried at all that in the midst of, you know, just a few years after the financial collapse, we're living in a class warfare country, really, even like 4 or 5 years ago prior to the election of Donald Trump. Was there a fear that you were going to be glamorizing, romanticizing these hedge fund guys in the way that, you know, Wall Street inadvertently did with Gordon Gekko?
No, we've been fascinated by this world for a long time. I mean, even going back to the financial crisis, we'd been working on shows in this area. And then the crisis actually made it sort of less appetizing for the world. But the thing that caught our eye was there were a couple of these high-flying billionaires, self-made guys, still pretty young in their 40s, in this world of hedge funds, and there were these prosecutors going after them almost to make a name for themselves. And a lot of them went on to run for elected office after their careers, sort of saying, I caught these guys, you know, I did this. These guys were stealing from all of us. And
the new gangsters, like Giuliani went after the mob, right? That was the thing that sort of set him up.
Yeah, and we thought, you know, we didn't worry about glamorizing it. We wanted to just portray it and let people take from it what they would.
Also, we knew part of the trick we were trying to play, right? When you're doing this and you know, Tarantino talks about how now the audiences are so sophisticated, you guys all are, that the audience starts leaning in the direction they think the show is going to go. So we knew that by introducing acts in the way we did, you know, the first 6 episodes of the first season, he doesn't do that much bad stuff. In the pilot, he does a tiny bit of what might be insider trading or might not, but then he's this charismatic, cool, it seems from the outside, you're like, wow, this guy's charismatic, and he talks really well, and he's powerful, and he's rich, and he looks like Damian Lewis. But by the end of the first season, and if you haven't watched even the first season, I'm going to spoil something. I mean, he lets a guy he cares about a lot he has the choice to help that guy extend his life with a medical procedure or bribe a doctor into letting him die because he wants the information that guy has to die with him. And what we were interested in studying in an era where Donald Trump was running for office and where it seemed like so much of the country was willing to look at characteristics like power, verbal acuity, charisma, and substitute those for real qualities of character like kindness, empathy, humor. Like, we wanted to see if people would know, oh, Axe just did a terrible thing. Wait, why do I love him? And so we were conscious of sucking you in because we saw in the world people being sucked in by these rich, powerful men. And we wanted to showcase them in all of the glory, all of the way in which they seduce us, and then have them do worse and worse and worse things, and then see if people would go, oh, wait, they're bad.
Well, you also have your prosecutor, though, doing worse and worse things as well as the seasons progress, because the ends justify, like any politician, you know, the ends are supposed to the end is supposed to justify the means.
Well, as Bob Dylan says, everything's broken. You know, this is the world we find ourselves living in, a world where I mean, look at the world we're living in now. The Attorney General of the United States is making decisions, you can like it or not, but he's not making decisions based on ideas of justice, right? And he's making decisions based on career. And this is what David was
Partisan loyalty,
saying.
protecting
We
the
look at
party.
Chris Christie, we look at Spitzer, we looked at these guys, and it's often guys. That's why I keep saying guys and men advisedly. We look at these people these men who put themselves in positions of power that are supposed to be for the public good, and they ended up using them largely for their own good. And so we wanted to showcase that, and then put this incredibly powerful woman in the middle of it who had an agenda of her own and a worldview of her own, and see how the audience was going to react and who they were going to gravitate towards.
And we were kind of bracing ourselves for when that moment happened, when the audience, we were sure, was going to turn on Axe because he did this sort of heartless thing.
Yes.
But he did it in such a clever way and you know, such a brilliant way, and it worked so well for him that weirdly, like, everybody just celebrated it and saluted it. And we were like, okay, wow, now we have to figure out how to somehow temper this character so he doesn't just seem like we're trying to glamorize him.
That's the old David Chase thing, though, right? If he's the smartest guy in the room, he can kind of get away with whatever the hell he wants.
Well,
People like the smartest guy in the room. Yeah.
They do. And we're interested in why that's the case. Why don't they like the kindest person in the room? Why don't they like why don't they like the most empathetic person in the room? Why are they drawn just to the smartest, sort of most charismatic? Why is that the person we hold out to be our leader? We were interested in that. Also, Axe is really funny, so is Chuck. And that's another thing. These people use humor in the world, in life, to disarm you, to make you like them, to draw you in. And so we wanted the show to feel that way, to feel like these people love engaging in this battle, that for them it's a great time, that as long as they're in a fight, it doesn't matter if they're losing, if they're one step from death, as long as they're fighting, that's the most alive they can feel. That's the happiest they can feel. And that's what we were trying to put on display as a way to help people understand what they're looking at in the real world. And because it's really fun to watch.
This is tangential, but you just made me think of it. If people love the smartest guy in the room, what the hell are we doing with Donald Trump?
Fair question. Fair question.
Because he is conniving and evil, but he's not the smartest guy in any room.
They
he's
even
ever
like a
in.
guy who just says he's the smartest guy in the room.
I think that's what it is.
That's it.
Right. He could be like, you know, spilling something on his shirt. Like, I am the smartest man in the world. I went to the best schools. So this last episode that we saw, Paul Giamatti's character finally confessed to the world that he is a practicer of sadomasochistic sex acts in the privacy of his own home or in the dungeon that he and Maggie Siff frequent. Backtrack to where that idea came from. Was that like a twist on Spitzer? Like Spitzer, you know, was arrested with an escort. Was that like finding a new way to have someone do that?
It was, you know, we put Chuck into this bind where somebody had sort of blackmail. Yeah, thank you.
I can't believe
blackmail
you just said
material. Yeah, awful. Where
My fault.
Chuck,
I caught it.
So somebody had blackmail material on him, and we conceived of this episode, and it was written last summer. And we thought, you know, what's the most sort of bold and daring move you could make to get out from under it? Well, it's like taking the power away from the person by taking control and saying it yourself. And it was weird because, this Bezos thing happened much more recently. Before the episode aired, but the episode was written and shot long before it, where he just sort of said, somebody's trying to blackmail me, and I'm going to say what I did because I'm so powerful. If I can't, then who can? And in a way, Chuck was trying to take control of his situation, and he felt that there was an audience and a world and a voting bloc there that would respond to that.
In some ways, Trumpian. It's not Trumpian in the way that he's not destroying anything by doing it, and he's actually admitting to something that could liberate people. But there is an element of I am taking the power away from you by being yeah, I steal. Yeah, I do this
well,
too.
we
You
did
can't
think
say
about the way that
anything.
Trump moved. The episode is called The Overton Window, and we did think about the way that Trump had moved the Overton Window on a whole bunch of stuff. Stuff that you had thought would be disqualifying 2 years ago turns out not only to not be disqualifying, but to maybe cause people to endorse him. We saw that, and so that was in our thinking. But I think what you were also asking was why we came up with this idea of the sadomasochism for Chuck.
Yeah, where did that start?
And that came from when Dave and I were writing the movie The Girlfriend Experience, also with Steven Soderbergh. We were interviewing these women who were $2,000 and $3,000 an hour escorts. And we would be interviewing them at the laptops open, and they would be talking. And at the end of the interview, many of them, let's say a third of them or half of them, said, I have one more thing to tell you. And we said, what? And they would say, have you ever heard of blank? And they would name an incredibly powerful man. And we'd say, yes. And they'd say, that guy likes to be dominated. And we heard it over and over and over. And we kept saying, why? And they kept talking about how these people who out there in the world are that dominant, are imposing their will. Sometimes the only way they can feel present, alive, is by completely ceding that power to somebody else in a sexual setting. And when we heard that, we didn't really use it in GFE, but we carried it around. And when we created Chuck Rhodes, we realized the way he manifests in the real world, he's the kind of guy who would need that in the privacy of his own home. So that's where that came from.
In the wake,
psychological.
This is a huge shift in conversation, but in the wake of Trump, I am curious how the writing of the show changed for you guys, because so much of what you talk about in the show has become common conversation for people, whether it's oligarchs or money of this nature, or money going into politics in these different ways, or the Overton window have become totally common and household conversations for the first time. Did that change the way you guys wrote the show or thought about it?
We didn't try to address it directly. There were a couple of ways that it was affected directly. Chuck's job is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, and that's a political appointment. So the idea is that he would have been appointed by the prior president, and we don't say the president's name in the show, but when the regime changed in Washington, you have to speak to the fact that most of the guys that were appointed by the prior guy are going to get moved out. And something sort of loud happened with Preet Bharara. At first, he was offered the ability to stay on, and then quite soon after that, he was fired. We knew we had to deal with the fact that Chuck's job wouldn't be safe. So we did, and, we aren't making this thing in a vacuum, so just living in the world, what's going on around us sort of seeps in, but it's not like a head-on attack of current events in any way.
No, of course. I'm wondering if it made it easier for you to write certain stories because you felt like you didn't necessarily have to explain as much anymore because people are already kind of.
I'd gladly trade out whatever ease there is for him
sure.
not being president.
The fact that anything could happen suddenly in the world, I think it freed us to be able to not have to justify every story move. Anything
evil
can
to be
happen.
in the
Look what's
rails
going on.
Dude, honestly, I can't even believe how many times you've mentioned his name on stage here. I'm so
Oh,
sad.
really?
I'm so sad.
He rarely comes up this much, I swear. And I honestly sometimes at this point in my life back out of conversations about it because I'm like, what the fuck are we gonna say?
Right.
There's nothing we can do here.
It changed everything. I went from being a happy person to a sad person. That definitely affected how I write.
I mope around the house a lot.
Yeah,
That's really what
there
happened.
are tears on the keyboard now where there didn't used to be.
Shut off all news alerts on my phone because I can't go through a day that depressed anymore.
Yeah.
Going into the fourth season, the third season ends with with Bobby and Paul Giamatti's characters, or Damon's and Paul Giamatti's characters kind of coming together.
Yes.
Right? And then you move into the fourth season. Was there any worry about how close you could bring them? Or was there a feeling of like, eventually we have to pull them back apart because that's the pitch of the show?
I mean, we were so excited about.
It's great.
I mean, look, we're pro wrestling fans in a way, and I mean, there's nothing better than putting a babyface and a heel shockingly together, right? And suddenly they're a team.
But who's the heel here?
Right? That's a good
thing.
question.
That's
I mean,
what's so
but
fun
also
about
in
the
modern pro
show.
wrestling, that's a question too. In modern pro wrestling, it's really hard to decide who's a heel and who's not because
Giamatti's got such a
You're
evil
correct.
presence.
yeah, he does.
Damon
They both.
doesn't, but he's the
They're
more
both-
evil one you could
I mean, they're both. They both can play either role. Like Ric Flair or something. But the idea of putting them together, these people who were rivals, was completely exciting to us. And
Yeah, I mean, it was always a thrill when those guys would have a scene together in the early seasons. You know, it was just exciting to watch these guys work. And because of the way they were set up, they were often going after each other. So the scenes were very heightened. So to be able to have them in different sort of situations where they're not just attacking each other was super exciting to us.
What has been the hardest storyline or scene to write of the 4 seasons that you guys have put together? Has there been one where it was just days and days of you guys being like, what is the angle here? How do we figure this out? Something's missing.
I mean, it's really hard. Like, there's this book called Difficult Men about showrunners by Brett Martin. That's a great book that gives super insight into how to make a television show, an hour drama. I mean, it always feels like that, you know?
Yeah.
And then afterwards, when you solve it, you kind of like don't live in the pain of it. This is the real answer is a lot of stuff like there are episodes coming up this season that we love, but breaking the story, if you're not willing to take the easy way out, if you're not willing to do what you've done or has been done a lot before, that requires you to like walk around banging your head against the wall a lot before you solve how to do it. And you know, you have to stick to what you believe in and to what you think is going to work. And so it's really hard. It's not hard like manual labor is hard. But as far as sort of like trying to create something that people are going to really care about and that's not just a retread of what has happened before is taxing.
What's the worst fight that you guys have ever gotten into over a project that you're writing? Whether it's Billions or something else, and how did you manage it?
I don't have a good answer to that one because I can't really, you know, with Billions, it's our hearts are so in it, and it's such a functioning project for us that the fights are really like they're not even fights.
They're more fun.
We're both rowing in the same direction. There have been other things we've worked on that just weren't working out, that we had different ideas on or something, and like neither one of us were happy working on it. That I think that we were much touchier, but I don't have like a great memory for that stuff. Maybe you.
No, I mean, we really are like brothers without having the same parents, so we don't have that. We don't have the bullshit of having been raised in the same house. We're just like family. Like we don't, you know what I mean? We don't have that stuff. We just get along well, and we also are genuinely happy if the other guy can solve a problem. So we've gotten a lot of fights in our lives with like studio people and directors we didn't like and producers who tried to cheat us or something, but we don't get in fights with each other. I mean, we're the team. So I don't know. We're also old enough. Right. You know, I was 30 when we wrote our first script. So that stuff could have happened in our 20s, but we weren't doing this in our 20s, you know?
You know, so Maggie Siff's character is really unhappy about Paul Giamatti sort of coming out and airing their dirty laundry.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, there's really only one of two ways that this can go for the season. I'm probably wrong in both of those. She could either leave him or she's going to fucking give it to him really hard in the dungeon.
No spoilers.
And I'm wondering, I mean, I guess there's no spoilers there, but where are you leaning? Really dumb question, but I just...
We're leaning towards not spoiling it.
Fair. I just, like, when I saw how mad she was in the previous episode, I was like, oh, this is going to be a really fun climax, whichever direction this goes in.
Agreed.
Yeah. Asia K. Dillon, a wonderful casting decision last season. How did that happen? Like where did that character come from, and how did you meet Asia? They were doing a show in New York for a while, I believe.
But that's not how we met.
Yeah.
A few years ago.
I mean, this where the character came from is one of those things that you were asking about earlier. This is where just the world we're living in sort of pointed to the direction to us. Brian's kids were of a certain age. One was in college, one was in high school a couple of years ago when we were working on that season. And Brian came in and said, my kids come home and they tell me at the beginning of each semester, the teachers ask them to announce their pronouns in case anybody's had a change or wants to say it a different way or whatever. And everybody in the writer's room, you know, our age or within 10 or 15 years of our age, didn't really know what that was all about. We were all like, what do you mean? That doesn't, I've never heard that before. One guy in the room said, you know, I sat next to somebody like that who was gender non-binary at an event. I think maybe they'll come in and talk to us. And we realized that this was sort of happening in the world. And it was a fascinating opportunity to take a character who, on the inside, had a lot of the same stuff that Bobby Axelrod had, you know, the brilliant mathematical mind, the great business trader mind, but on the outside presented really differently. And to put them in the same environment in this, you know, sort of traditionally male world, and to see what happened as people tried to deal with them. And, you know, when you start out on a TV show, you can have great plans for what a character could turn into, but you know that if after an episode or two, the actor's not up to it or it's not clicking, you're going to sort of bail and go the other direction. Well, as soon as Asia was in the show, they were so magnetic and amazing, we realized we had somebody that we could give anything to and take the character anywhere. So it just built since then from their first episode.
How often do you find that with people that you put in the show that maybe it's like going to be 1 or 2 episodes and then you're kind of like, oh, let's get this person back. Let's write more for this person.
I mean, it's happened a number of times. Sarah's a great example.
Great call.
Malachi is another great example who plays Lonnie Watley. Malachi Weir. That character could have been 1 episode and done. And we just thought Malachi was so terrific that we kept writing for him over and over again. And then the next season, he was in like every episode. And since then, he's been in a few every season. And that was just because he came in and he was so great.
And the battle becomes when you hook into somebody who's super talented like these people. We're not the only ones who know usually. So they're often in other shows and you have to, or Broadway. So you have to juggle schedules. And these people, I remember Asia's first season, they were basically working 24 hours a day because they were on Orange is the New Black. So they would shoot nights on Orange is the New Black and then come to our set and start shooting the day scenes. And it was brutal for them, but, you know, they're young and strong. They did it.
One of the things that I love about Taylor's character, or Asia's character, Taylor, is that they believe there's a sense to them that if they can do their job and they can make money, they will be accepted. That is the main thing with their character. They have this, I wouldn't call it a luxury, but this skill alone will be the thing. And they say it quite often, you know, like, well, the money will buy that.
By the end of last season, they definitely say that. I think what Taylor thought in the beginning was if I can prove that I'm able to think at a very high level and make decisions and distinctions that Axe will recognize as really advanced thinking, I'll get to do more really fascinating work. But then the temptations of the world shift stuff some, right? If the win used to be a mind meld, like in the second episode we see Taylor in, they have like a mind meld with Axe. But as the thing goes on, that's not really enough, right? As Taylor starts getting rewarded in different ways, they're forced to grapple with their own morality and with how they can keep their moral center in a world that's constantly challenging it and pushing at it and chipping away at it. And we are really fascinated to see how that's going to play out over the length of the series. Whether Taylor can win that battle, that internal battle, or whether they can't.
Well, we're also seeing Taylor's potential weakness right now in the form of the one person that they want the most acceptance from, which is family. How far is Taylor willing to go to get that acceptance, and how much will that affect the decisions that they're making within their professional life, which is the most important thing to them usually?
It's awesome how closely you watch. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah, I'm a nerd.
You watch
guys.
really
So
closely.
sorry.
It's great. It makes us so happy. It's all you want in someone watching your show is that they pay that close attention. It's great.
You've got the best actors in New York
We
City
do.
on your show. I mean, that is the thing about Billions, outside of the great writing and the way it's shot and how much fun it is to watch. It is the best theater actors working in New York City
All
who
over
are
the
just
place, yeah.
in this show walking around all the time. It's so much fun to watch. Yeah, there's some Twitter questions, some audience questions. Before we get to that, though, jump ship on the show and talk about your two other projects that you guys have. You're an incredible novelist and prolific writer at this point, really. How many novels have you written?
Thank you. I've written 6. I haven't been that prolific lately because I did myself the favor of not expecting myself to put out novels while we've been working on the show. Our off seasons have been pretty tight. Yeah, so my last one came out in, I think, 2016. It's called Signature Kill.
How was that Signature Kill? How was that process for you? Like, what is your process like as a novelist, and how is it different from your process with Brian?
It's really different. It's very solitary. I'm just sitting there alone, trying to create the whole world on the page. There's never going to be an actor or cameras or anything, music to help it along. There's nobody to really talk to. I mean, I can talk to Brian about whatever struggle I might be having on something I'm working on, you know, when I'm done at some point. But when I'm doing the work, you're just alone. And, you know, that has its pluses, but it also drives you crazy.
I love, just because it's so great, when people all the time say they don't have time to write. I just want you to describe how you wrote these novels, because you had a day job, which was coming to write movies with me. Talk about when you wrote your novels.
I mean, I did write these books when we had movies going as writers, producers, and directors. So I live in Connecticut. I take the train to the city, and I write them on the way in and out. Amazing. And I just try to like net that time.
So like he would, you know, we'd be there writing, and I'd leave the day just totally drained from the work we were doing. And then he'd get back on the train and write another 6 pages of his novel. I'm in awe of the ability he has to focus and concentrate and do that, and then turn out work that's that incredibly great. I mean, the treat for me when he's writing the novels is I'm always the first reader, and so I'll get, you know, it's years of work, and I'm rooting for him from the side, and then he'll hand me this book, and each one is better than the one before, and it's what an amazing joy for me that I get to read those when like no one in the world has seen them before.
Who's your biggest influence as a novelist? Because you write in a specific genre.
Yeah, well, I mean, growing up, I read a lot of Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and there's this writer named James Salter I love. And then as far as crime novelists, Chandler and Hammett probably. Yeah. And more modern guys are Lawrence Block.
Was there a Mosley reference in the show?
There was. Always outnumbered, always outgunned.
That was a reference
As Mosley
again
said.
There was a reference again that I was kind of like, I don't know if that character would say that, but I fucking love it. Thank you.
You don't think Axe would
Axe
have
has read Walter
He's
Mosley?
read Walter Mosley.
You think so?
Yeah.
Because Walter Mosley's a great genre novelist, right?
Well, yeah,
One of the
absolutely.
best. Devil in Blue Dress. I mean, the guy's amazing. Well, why wouldn't Bobby Axelrod's read a lot of books? Like, if you talk to these hedge fund self-made hedge fund billionaires, are shockingly well read because they're mostly really smart people. I'm not talking about whether they're moral or not. I'm not talking about whether they're good or not, because there are some who are and some who aren't. But they're mostly intellectually curious. And so they might not go around talking about, I mean, they would. Actually, they've all read Hemingway. They've all read Fitzgerald. You could sit at a table and bring that stuff up and expect that they won't know, and then suddenly 4 references of books will come flying back at you. Some aren't, but I think many of them are shockingly well read. Again, like, for instance, definitely like The President isn't. But even though I don't like Steve Mnuchin at all, like, I think that guy's terrible at his job and not a good person.
Financed Inherent Vice.
But that guy has read books. Like, he read Pynchon. There's no doubt about it that guy's read Pynchon. He has. He financed that movie.
But, I mean, that was a show. He gave Warner Brothers money, and they just doled out to a bunch of different movies. I don't think he even knew whether it was going to be Lego Movie 2, Suicide Squad, or Inherent Vice. It was just like, cool, show me the returns, guys. Hopefully I make some money back. Hope maybe he's read some books though. I don't want to underestimate anybody and their love of literature, but he's.
Oh, I'm not saying they loved it. I'm just saying they've probably read it.
And you have a podcast that I love.
Oh, thanks.
It's called The Moment. Hugely inspiring for me, I have to say. It was something that when I was struggling with work that I was doing on the side, it was something that really helped me be like, okay, this is how I can find a process of my own. And I wouldn't say it's the same as what people talk about or what you talk about, but dabbling in all of those different ideas of process helped me find whatever way
It really
that I
helps
work.
me. I mean, that really helps me too. I love hearing that. That's the reason I do the podcast.
About the artist's way, I journaled in the morning.
It's
and
useful, right?
insanely useful.
It's so useful.
I find that morning pages are the most useful for when you have a short block of time to write later in the day after having done stuff, because you brain dump in the morning, then go do whatever work you have to do, and then you can actually somehow, and it's like it's not even like anything tells you, but it just clicks a little bit
You're
faster. to do
so
work.
right. I mean, that he gave me that book originally 22 years ago, and look, the podcast, as you know, the premise of the podcast is that people who've lived creative lives or have accomplished stuff in a creative realm, when you see the finished product, it looks really simple, right? It looks like it's finished in a way that you can't imagine being able to do that yourself because it's so polished and refined. But in truth, there were days when they thought it was impossible, when they thought they had no talent, when they thought they were lazy, when they thought they were weak, when they went to Thanksgiving dinner and their brother's girlfriend was like, why are you writing? That's stupid. And they took it home with them and they believed it,
They gave it to someone when they thought it was close to done.
And that person said
didn't
it
get
sucks,
Yeah.
And so I love taking people who've accomplished so much, Seth Meyers, and going, well, what was it like when you were waiting tables? And what did it feel like? And how did you know you were special? Did you know you were special? What kept you going? When it seemed impossible, why did you get up the next day and get on the stage after you had just bombed? And I love talking to chefs, chefs who've achieved huge fame, but who lost their first 4 jobs, And the reason I love doing it is I learn about it. It's helped me in low periods. I've been doing it for 5 years. But also every day I get letters from people telling me that they're able to do the work because of something that one of my guests said. So yeah, it's The Moment with Brian Koppelman on. You can get it anywhere you get podcasts.
And Brian manages to put out a new episode every week, even during Billions. And it's because of the people who give him this feedback and say how important it is to them. I know
that's why
keeps
I
you
do
going.
it. Yeah. That's why I do it.
When you started doing it, did you ever think it would become this thing that you would feel a responsibility to put out every week?
No, I mean,
And do you ever resent the fans that made it a responsibility for you?
I don't, sometimes the prep, as you know, because you obviously really prepare. Yeah. Like if you're gonna have somebody come to your place, take an hour and a half out of their day, they have to get there, they have to take the train back or whatever, and they have to sit there, I'm gonna do the work required to conduct the interview correctly, so I'm gonna read everything and watch everything and study. So there are times, of course, when we're making the show, and then it's Sunday, because I can't do it really during the week, so, and then it's Saturday, I wake up after shooting all night Friday night, and I have to read about this person I'm going to interview. But inevitably, man, the moment I'm sitting across from them, and they're saying something great, I'm elevated by it. I mean, it's an incredible privilege to be able to do. As you know, the weird thing is when people listen to a podcast, especially, they really think they're your best friend, and that creates weird moments for me sometimes. Because I'm really who I am on the podcast, and so you do know me if you listen, but I don't know you. Yeah. And so that sometimes just creates a disconnect that I've had to learn how to manage.
How have you managed it?
I just run away.
You run away?
Yeah. No, I just try to really connect and take a second and realize we do know each other, and then I'm like, ask them questions.
Then he calls security.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you have to listen.
I do though. I had a guy approach me outside the studio a couple weeks ago. It's very quick. It's one of my favorite things that's happened to me in a long
hear
time.
it.
He approaches me and he goes, "Hey Rob," and I was like, "It's Ricky."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Do you like poems?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not gonna say I don't like poems. I like poetry. I got poetry books." And he's like, "But do you like poems about like New Order, the band?" And I was like, I guess. Where's this going? And he goes, because I've got some great poems. And I saw you interview Billy Corgan. And I've got a poem called Fucking Billy Corgan. And I was like, I'd like to read that poem if you would give it to me. And he goes, I saw you interview him and I thought, man, Rob would really like this poem. And I went, it's Ricky. And he went, whatever, man. When can I bring you the poem? And I was like, I don't know if you're a fan, but I love this so much. That's the last fan interaction that I had that I was like, you don't really respect me or anything, but I love it.
Wait,
this is great.
the poem never got read?
No, I told him to bring him to the front desk. He never brought him here. If
Hey,
you're
man,
watching,
fine,
if you do
bring the
watch
poem.
show,
Bring
the
Rob his poem.
Yeah, bring Rob the poem.
Robbie has
please.
been sitting here waiting and waiting for the poem.
All I want is to read fucking Billy Corgan, which I'm not sure if it's like fucking Billy Corgan or
Yeah, right.
fuck, like I'm not sure where it's going. We have a Twitter question for Brian and David. Did you always know Axe and Chuck would cooperate at some point, or did the idea come later?
Believe it came later. I don't think that we planned this.
No, I remember when it showed up. It showed up after season 2. After season 2, it was clear how it would happen. You know, you always have these ideas like this could. You're always looking at a multiplicity of possibilities of the possible multiverse, right? But at the end of the second season, and right as we were starting the third, we understood that was going to be the fourth season. That we understood that the end of the third season was going to really be this coming together.
Was there also a sense of having to shake things up in a way? Because no?
No, it was more like what would happen here to these characters given the events of the season before. Right. And so when we looked at where they were, it was like, well, this seems like the most compelling way for these things to happen.
Right. There wasn't a sense, because oftentimes with shows, especially when it's a show about two people competing against each other, or maybe a technology platform that is constantly struggling, there is the risk of repeating.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we didn't want it to be like Spy versus Spy in season 8, but it wasn't. By season 3, it didn't. You know, more and more people were still watching. It didn't have that feeling to us. It was like, no, maybe it would have if we didn't come up with this idea. Maybe by now it would have, but luckily we figured out how to do it.
I mean, some kind of change and evolution and shaking it up is always part of it, and we're aware of that. We try to make it organic and not chase some sort of like more sensational way, like, hey, how can we just flip this, you know?
Yeah.
Or like, what,
Right, that's
what
not
seems
what
like
we're
it
doing.
wants to happen next?
Right. I think we have a couple questions in the audience. Who has a question? Oh, hey there.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I am a aspiring screenwriter, and I would just like to know some tips on what you guys do when you get writing block. I know that there's really not much to do, but just sit down and do it. But I would love to know what your guys' experiences are when going through that.
Well, it's the thing that Robbie said, which is, you gotta. It's morning. Have you ever done the artist?
Mark, actually.
Oh, sorry, Steve. Have you ever done Steve-O, buddy? Have you ever done morning pages, like as described by Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way?
No. Yes, I try to write for a couple hours every morning, but it's just it's been hard to stay
That
consistent
sounds
with
like
it.
you're
different.
That sounds like you're trying to write your project for a couple hours every day.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing to try to do.
Yeah.
And a worthy and noble effort. But the morning pages are 3 pages written by hand with a pen, not a keyboard, so that the ink is literally flowing, where you're not trying to craft anything. It's just free associating whatever's in your head, the weather, what you ate, you know, all the way to your highest hopes and aspirations and everything in between. You don't stop the pen, you just keep it going. It could sort of be nonsense. It's not meant to be read even by you. You don't really even go back and read it. If you do that every day, it starts something, some engine. It breaks down the blocks of sort of self-criticism and this idea that everything has to be crafted and perfect.
Yeah.
And it may not happen after the first day, but after a couple of weeks, you'll find that when you sit down to do your sort of more concerted effort, it'll just happen.
Yeah, I was a terribly blocked writer until I was 30, and I did this, and I haven't had that problem in a long 30
Because
years.
it's self-pressure. You're putting pressure on yourself to be amazing, and you're trying to write some finished thing when it's just a first draft, and nothing's good enough, and you're going back and erasing and just freezing up.
I mean, the best $10 you could spend is on The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, and then there's a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield that also gives a lot of great tools. And I had Pressfield on the podcast, and he talked about this a bunch, and that's a free way to start, so you could try there.
Okay. Thank you guys so
Thanks.
much.
Good question.
Yeah, listen to Brian's podcast too, if that's a big help. I found it to be a big help.
It's a lot about this, yeah.
The Artist's Way, one of my favorite recommendations in it is the I think it's called the Artist's Date.
Yeah,
or
it's
like
great.
it's going on like one time a week, going somewhere, whether it's a museum, a movie, or play, and doing it completely alone and taking it in. It's
Yes.
so helpful. You
Super
absorb
helpful.
content in a completely different way. And you probably don't think of it as content when you see it either.
No, I think you're completely inspired, or swept away, or maybe made angry, and you feel like you're going to top it or something like that. But yeah. It definitely unlocks something.
Guys, thank you so much for being here. It's been a real pleasure to have you on here and talk to you about the show and everything else. Billions is on Sunday nights at 9 on Showtime. It's so great. You can pick up David's books in bookstores everywhere and on Amazon. And The Moment, Brian's podcast, is available on iTunes, right?
Anywhere you get your podcasts.
Anywhere you get podcasts.
Thanks, Stuart.
You got Gary, actually. Thanks. Let's give Brian and David a round of applause for being here. Let's hear it.
Thank you.
Great.